Welcome back to Dig It RC. We're going to continue our work on the Weena dump truck, or the Tr212. We're finishing up with the lighting here on the cab, and I decided I'm just going to do this front lighting. So I did the other side, the driver's side, the same as I did the passenger side. Got those lights glued in and get the wires fed through, and we're going to wire those together. Just looking at the cab, I decided not to put top lights in. Level of difficulty was not worth the effort of putting the lights up in that cab, especially if I'm going to repaint this thing later. So they might get added in at a later time, or just left out and not have any running lights up in the top. But we'll get these things all wired up and ready to go and tested before we put this thing together. Now, it's kind of weird with this connector. The wires don't like to twist on it. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to tin the wires so that everything's together, and it will help me with doing my final solder joint with this wire to the light leads. So one of the things you want to make sure you always do, flux your joints. It helps the solder to flow and gives you a better joint altogether. So now we'll get all of our positives, put those together for the light leads, and we'll grab our negative wires and we'll get those all put together. And I'm using here shrink wrap that is for marine use. So it's got a glue in it, so it creates a nice watertight seal. Now, it's not necessary, but I like the way that this forms and holds on the wiring. It's a little bit thicker. That glue provides a little better insulation. So I really like using that shrink wrap. That shrink tubing works really well. And it has a really good shrink ratio as well. But especially when you're using it on larger wire to smaller wire, you need a really good shrink ratio. And this works really well for that. Beautiful joints there. So now we'll slide our shrink tubing over the wires. And again, you want as tight a fit as possible with the large wires so that it does shrink up nicely to the smaller wire. So we'll get those pushed in, jammed over those wires, and especially let your joint cool down just a little bit before trying to slide that, or your shrink tubing will start shrinking prematurely on you. So get that slid down in place, then we'll use a heat gun and we will shrink these tubes down. I prefer this over the lighter method. I've always had a heat gun because of my model airplane days, putting on monocoat, but the heat gun works really good for getting a good clean shrink on this tubing. So we'll plug in a 2S battery. That's about 7.4 volts. And all of our lights are working. So all of our joints are good. Everything's connected good. And that's the voltage I'm going to be running on these lights. They run well on 2S packs as well as 3S packs. No problem on this lighting. So they're rated for up to 12 volts or 13 volts. So it works really good. I've not had any problem working either 2S or 3S batteries with these lights thus far. They're very efficient, so it doesn't even burn through a pack. So I can tie them on with the same battery that I'll be using for the truck. And that's how I'll set it up. So I'm just running one battery. Now I'm testing my fit out here and seeing where I need to route the wires when I put the cab back on here. Just to make sure that I'm not pinching any of the wires and making sure everything fits well in place on there. And once I get that kind of figured out, where that needs to go. I'll go ahead and get this cab put on. This front end, this grill portion just kind of just snaps into place right in there, those two little tabs. Once it pops into place, then it's got two screws at the bottom that hold it into place. I had to pinch these together pretty tight, put that pressure on the lenses to the light holders, and then it screwed in real nice. Checking right here just to make sure that I'm not putting any screws back where I've got to go through both locations for securing this cab. So I'm just making sure I get the right holes and get these screws back in place where they're supposed to go. Alright, so we're finished with the cab for now. Lighting's done, ready to go. It's ready to be mounted to the chassis. But now we got to figure out the rest of our wiring and the electronics that got to go in here. So figuring out what I want to keep, what I want to get rid of. And so we're just going to go through this wiring. We're going to clip out what we don't need and get rid of. And after examining that servo that they use, I'm happy they used a standard size servo for the mounting on this. That made this so much easier. But I determined that with the way it's wired and everything, it doesn't have really a signal wire. It's got a left-right on-off type because it's not exponential. So I'm going to have to get rid of that servo. But with it being a standard size, I'll be able to use a spare standard size I've got laying around to put in there. And hopefully everything will mount up well here. S148 standard servo. This is out of an old balsa airplane that I had, no longer have, but I kept the servo out of it. So even though it's an older servo, it's going to work excellent for this application. So we'll get all the old equipment taken off of here. I was thinking of using the old servo horn, but decided to put on the OEM servo saver and servo horn that they used. It's a little tighter fit on this servo than it is on the standard servo for this truck, but it still managed to fit all right with just a little bit extra pressure. So the spline's still all lined up. It was just a little bit thicker where it had to push in, but it still pushed in real good and secured, so we're set. Here's something that you'll only do a couple of times, and that's forgetting to center your servo, getting it mounted, and realizing you got to redo it because your servo was off center. So I use my little smart card here from Spectrum. That's a cell tester, battery tester, check your voltage. So these things are awesome. I love this because it's so easy to test your servos and everything with too. So this thing's fantastic. So you just make sure your signal wire lines up with your signal wire with your servo. Get that thing plugged in. And then once you're on your servo test mode there, all you have to do is press the center button, and you can test the left, right, center. And you can use the arrows just to test incremental portions of your servo, but just by pressing the button, it'll do the left, right, and center right away. So then once you get the servo centered, you can leave it there, get your horn lined up right where you want it. So it makes it so much easier. Then when you plug your radio in, your servo is already centered. So things are set and ready to go. Now, it don't look like the splines line up exactly quite right. It's a little tilted off to the right. So I'll take that out with trim on the radio. That's something on aircraft we could take out on the mechanical controls, linkages and stuff. But with this model, we'll take it out with the trim on the radio. Alright, I've got all that together, test it out. Ooh, right there, center, left there, center. Ah, fantastic. Alright, moving on. Here we got the yellow wires. We're going to keep those. That goes to the switch. We're going to keep those black and red wires there. That's the battery connector. So we're going to keep those as well. So we'll get rid of some of this other wiring that we don't want. I'm figuring in my head how I'm going to do the wiring, so the wiring schematic's all in my brain. So who knows if it's going to work or not. I got to determine, I got the motor wires for the dump. I've got the motor wires for the drive, and then I've got the light wires as well. And I'm going to be changing those LEDs out. So I'm going to just eliminate the LEDs that are in there, and I'm going to put my own LEDs in. So these are 5mm LEDs, and I do have 5mm red LEDs, which will work out perfect. So we'll just stick those in the lens cover and the holder, and then we'll route our wiring and make sure our wiring is routed to where it's not going to reach any pinch points. So I'll show you in here in just a minute. There's a few slots where those wires tuck into, and it fits pretty tight with the resistor that's in there, but it still fits. All right, test time. Let's see if these lights work. I see 1, 2, both lights are working. Excellent. All right, here's our drive motor wires. So we're gonna clip those off. We'll get those stripped down. We want to test them out, so we'll be hooking those up to the ESC that we got right here. So we're gonna do a little bit of rewiring with the ESC, but we just want to get this thing plugged in and test it out to see if it's going to work first. grab our receiver here. We got everything wired up to the ESC, so we'll plug the ESC into one of these channels. Really doesn't matter which one on here. We'll get it plugged in, test it out. We'll move the channels when we decide where we're going to put it for sure. All right, big question is now, will this thing work? Well, to find out, subscribe and turn on notifications, because that's going to be on the next video. Thanks for joining this time though.